Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Educator podcast. I am so excited to be with you today. My name is Delise Germond, and I have the wonderful and loved Kelli Wilt here. Hey, Kelli, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Delise. I'm so excited to talk to you about today's topic, and I think it's going to be one that's going to be really beneficial for a lot of our listeners.
I think so too. Today, we're getting ready to talk about homeschool hacks for young listeners. And before we get into it, we do want to encourage you. This podcast is for people who are in the daily delights of homeschooling, but also for people who are just curious about homeschooling. Maybe you're just dipping your toe in. And if you haven't gotten started with homeschooling, we would love to encourage you to check out our local communities at classicalconversations.com, because while learning about this in a digital space is really fun and interesting, it is even better when you're shoulder to shoulder with another homeschool family. So you can do that by looking it up on the website. We'll leave a link for you below in the description. And without any further ado, Kelli, welcome to the show. Let's talk about some homeschooling hacks for young learners.
I love that. I love that. Don't we all feel like we just need to hack the system sometimes in order to feel successful, especially when our children are small? And we're busy. We're busy with all the things. We're busy, helping to take advantage of every teachable moment to cultivate a mind and a heart for Christ. And our days are filled with lots of things. And we want to make sure that they're the right things and they're the eternal things. So I think some good hacks are well in order for us to be able to feel that we are accomplishing the goals that we set out for our families.
Absolutely. And, before we jump into just the ideas and the ways that the Lord has helped us to navigate this, I want to tell you guys, you're hearing from two homeschooling, full-time working moms. We were discussing this the other day, the fact that I think it's easy to listen to the show and think that we are just home with our children all day. And that's great. We are home with our children. We are also working mothers. And so we really are speaking to you all from a perspective of people who've had to get a little bit creative, and the Lord has met us there. So why don't you introduce us to your family, just so people know who you are and who your kids are and kind of the experience that you've had, Kelli, and then I'll tell them about me.
Sure, I'm glad to do that. So our family first discovered Classical Conversations in 2008 when we received a Christmas card from a friend that had one simple sentence in it about a friend of ours joining a classical co-op, which we don't use that word. We like community, where, she was able to meet with friends. And I thought, how lovely that you would get together and listen to classical music every week with your daughter, and your friends. And so that first information meeting opened up a world of possibility to me. I am a trained educator. I actually graduated with a bachelor's in elementary education. But let me tell you, friend, the Lord has used homeschooling to revolutionize in my mind and my heart what education truly is. And so that information meeting opened the door for our family. I joke and say that our youngest came with me because she was in my tummy. I was expecting her at that time. But that fall, our family opened the door to classical Christian home education. And we began walking a path that in a year and a half we will complete. So my two oldest sons have graduated through Challenge 4, and they are both adults and they're in the workforce, and they're currently walking a different path post-graduation. But my daughter, Libby, was just recently on an episode of The Everyday Educator, and she is completing Challenge 3 right now. And I have the blessing of also being her director. And it's lovely. It is the best experience because I get to be there in Community Day, having conversations with her and her friends. But I'm grateful because, like you said, life is busy. It is busy to be working full-time and to homeschool the last of our three children through her final years of high school, and then also to be directing. So there are definitely hacks to the system that I try to utilize so that I am able to meet the needs of my family, and yet I'm also able to contribute in a positive way in the workspace. So that's kind of the phase of life where our family is right now. Why don't you talk a little bit about where your family is and where you are in this stage of your homeschool journey?
Yeah, so we're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum right now, which is a lot of fun because while you are at the beginning of your homeschool or at the end of your homeschooling journey, very much at the beginning. And so there are things that I thought I knew that I wanted to do that I'm already restarting. My oldest son is 4. He has a September birthday, so he's a fresh 4. We're recording this in a December. And then I have an infant, and I was homeschooled through high school. So I have an idea of what I want to accomplish. But as we all know, doing is much different than thinking.
Yes.
So it's been fun, and I can't wait to hear from you and just hear some of your wisdom. So where I want to start really is just the first idea of going for the grace. You
Mm.
know, Kelli, when you started your homeschool experience,
Mhm.
did God shift your expectations? I know when I started this school year, this
Mhm.
semester, I had this false idea that if we just got the academics done, like if we just did the quote important stuff, I would feel good about my homeschooling day. And what I'm learning is that if we only do the quote academics, which is
Right.
obviously, I keep quoting it because it's all learning, but
Right.
if we only do the most scholastic feeling activities, I usually feel terrible about the day
Yes.
because
Yes.
that's not why I'm homeschooling. How has
Yes.
God shifted your perspective, Kelli?
It's so interesting because I came into homeschooling as a former public school educator. So in my mind, like I had this paradigm that I thought I was just going to, shoehorn homeschooling right into that classroom model and we were going to be golden because in my mind, like logically, I thought if I can do this with 25 kindergartners, how hard can it be? Now, that would be what I would put in quotation marks. How hard could it be to just educate 3 children? And I look back on that, and I think as soon as that thought flitted across my mind, I am sure the Lord, in His omniscience, chuckled because He knew the ride that we would go on as a family through homeschooling. So, I think my expectations shifted in that. First of all, I had super high expectations for myself. I
Mm.
was hypercritical of everything that I planned wasn't enough. I was constantly second guessing myself and thinking, you're missing something. You're missing something. What are you not doing? You should be doing. And those first
Mhm.
years were not peaceful. They were not enjoyable. They were stress filled. But I was the person who was applying the pressure. My dear sweet husband looked at me day after day and said, I think you're doing enough. I think you're doing enough. And I just thought, it's just I guess I thought, I had this invisible burden that our children had to be the, fill in the adjective here, EST to every adjective because I felt like I had to prove homeschooling was the right choice.
Mm.
And that just, I like what you said about a false idea. Man, that was a false idea. I wish that I could rewind time and I could talk to her and I could say, hey, babe, first of all, God's called you to this and He will equip you to fulfill His purpose in your life. And this is the calling that He has for you right now. And I wish that I could go back to those little years and I could just sit and I could attend to my children and I could look at them and remember all those sweet details. That they had a curly lock of hair that always fell across their forehead just so when they were, focused on tasks or, just the way that, they snuggled. And I wish that I could go back and bottle up all of those memories and just take a big deep whiff of them from time to
Mm.
time because now I have 3 children who are still every bit as delightful, just in different ways. And our struggles are bigger, but the blessings are also even magnified. And so I think my expectations for myself have shifted. I've become more grace filled toward myself, but I
Mm.
also became more grace filled toward my children. Because, like you said, at first I was like, oh, if we get all the academic things done, then I'm going to feel good about this, right? This is where we will be successful. And one thing I love about our Scribblers at Home Recipes for Lifelong Learners book is that it gives us 5 achievable goals. That if we play, we pray, we read, explore, and serve, those are very large, umbrella shaped goals that can contain a lot of the daily do's that
Mhm.
we participate in. especially when our children are young. And so if we center our thoughts on, within those arenas, it helps us to not only focus on the academic, but to also think about relationship and to think about our relationship with our children, their relationship to us, and our relationship outward to our community, which is a blessing of homeschooling that when we first came into classical conversations, I'll admit, I didn't take advantage of the way that I should have. I needed to call moms and go, "Hey, you bring your kids over here and we're just going to let them loose in our fenced backyard and we're going to drink some coffee and just talk. And you tell me, what are you struggling with right now? Let me share with you and let's just be in relationship with one another." Oh man, I think I was so concerned about what other people would think that I was fearful to be vulnerable. And now I
Yeah.
look back and go, some of the greatest relationships that I have built in our homeschooling community began in moments where a mom and I looked at each other and we were about to pull our hair out and we looked over and went, "You too?" And that was bonding in that moment. So
Yeah.
I think to summarize, I think my expectations for myself changed, and I think my expectations for my children, and then I think even by extension, my expectations for what community meant also
Mm.
changed. So go for the grace. Let everything be grace filled, grace for yourself, grace for your children, grace toward your community, and the rewards that you reap will be manifold from that.
That's so great. Yeah, the rewards will be manifold. And I
Mhm.
love that you said, you know, that bonding definitely comes in a moment of vulnerability. And
Yes.
guys, before Kelli and I pressed record, I said, listen, I want this show. We were actually going to flip it. I was going to ask her, she was going to ask me the questions. And I said, I like this show because I need this show. This was me yesterday when you just talked about your husband saying, I think you're doing enough. That was me yesterday in
Yes.
tears with my husband saying,
Yes.
I'm trying so hard and it just doesn't feel like it's right. And it's not even that I think that there's something I could change. It's that there's that internal
Yes.
battle. You know, you're always doing your absolute best, or at least you would hope you're
Yes.
doing your best.
Yep.
But having the confidence and really the peace and the grace to know, hey,
Yeah.
because you're being faithful to what the Lord is calling you to do, you
Right.
are headed in the right direction because this is his show, not your show.
That's right.
I think is the game changer. And so I love what you
Mhm.
shared there. And just speaking of those expectations, I think one of the outward pressures we have is also from the traditional school model. I,
Mhm.
like you, was an educator
Mhm.
before I became a homeschooling mom. And so I do know how to, get a troop of 5-year olds or however old they are to do one thing and it looks great. But homeschooling is not that. Why do you think that a lot of Christian
Mhm.
families really do feel that pressure to mimic the
Mm.
traditional school model, Kelli?
That's such a good question. I think a lot of times when we are uncomfortable, we revert to what we are familiar with.
Hmm.
And I think for a lot of us, we weren't. You have a blessing of being classically educated by a faithful mom and dad who modeled that so well for you to take into your homeschooling journey. My experience was that I was privately educated. And so when I went to college, I went to a private college and they showed me a formula for what a classroom looked like because I needed, like we said, to manage lots of little bodies. And, I think when we began homeschooling, I wasn't familiar with the classical model. I don't think I really understood I didn't understand what is the end game of
Hmm.
classical Christian education. And so in my mind, I thought, if I'm going to make this work, I'm going to have to remake classical education in my image so that I can be successful. And the
Mhm.
amazing thing is, the thing that I have learned after many years of doing this is that God takes this path and man, he remakes you. He remakes your heart, he remakes your mind, he remakes your expectations for your family and your goals for your family. If you submit yourself to him and you commit your way to him. And so I think for a lot of us, we just are uncomfortable with different ideas. We think that in order for us to find success, we have to revert to what we saw as successful. But the reality is, a lot of us that were educated in other ways, we may look at our past experience and go, yeah, that was fantastic. We may not, and so it's kind of futile for us to remake our children's education in a path that we took that wasn't as successful for
Yeah,
us
not
as we would have
replicating it.
liked, and to expect different results. And so it's a futile thing, right? A lot of times we have to push through the discomfort, and we have to have good conversations with people who are even, just like this conversation, just a few steps farther ahead, to ask them good questions and to seek out answers so that we can alter our path, in a way that suits our family, maybe that gives us the results that we're longing for. But I think a lot of it is just discomfort, friend. I do. Almost like when you put on a pair of shoes and they're half size too tight, you're not going to want to keep those shoes on. And sometimes in home education, when we begin, homeschooling might feel a half size too tight because it's different than how we were taught or how we envisioned our children would be taught. But it actually becomes it becomes the most beautiful fit for your family when you submit your way to the Lord. My husband played soccer all through high school, and he used to joke that he would get his cleats so that they would be form-fitting to his feet, and he would soak them, and then he would wear them until they dried out, and then they would conform to his foot. And it made him a better soccer player because the shoe was just like, I guess he became more aerodynamic. I'm not sure, but I kind of think homeschooling is that way too. We're going to go through some discomfort as we align ourselves to a different path, but the more that we absorb ourselves in that path, I think about him soaking those cleats in the water and then conforming them to his foot. The more that we embrace the discomfort and we move forward with purpose and we ask good questions, the better a fit it will become for us over time.
Hey, everybody, we want to interrupt the show to tell you more about OLS, or CC Online Learning Seminars. These seminars are an online platform for adults that is designed for convenient and ongoing classical learning. I don't know about you, but I definitely need to continue my learning as a classical educator and a lead learner. So adults can challenge themselves academically, spiritually, and mentally with a variety of OLS courses that are offered. The OLS online learning seminars instructors are classical conversations parents who have graduated their students and cultivated their gifts, interests, and hobbies over the years of homeschooling, and they want to show us how to do the same. The seminars are open for any adult, whether they're CC members or not, and the seminars range between 4 and 6 weeks. Each of the individual sessions lasts for 1 to 2 hours, and the instructors set the prices for their own seminars. So you can find out more with the link that we'll give you on the show notes, but we hope that you enjoy growing and learning with us with OLS. Let's get back to the show. I love that. And, I think part of the challenge is when you're talking about, okay, this is what I know to be education, and this is the new thing I'm exploring and learning,
Right.
is a better way for my family. I think part of the challenge is finding that good balance between structure
Yes.
and listening to the Lord,
Yes.
and being careful not to strive, in your own strength. And you don't ever want to become lackadaisical in your homeschool day. That is a temptation. Some people do fall into it. We all fall into laziness. That is a real temptation, right? So how do you know when you're hitting that sweet spot, Kelli, between having that kind of breath and time in your day and being way too structured? How do you know when you're hitting the good spot in the middle?
I think that you often can look at your children and they're a really good indicator whether or not you're in the sweet spot. As homeschooling parents, we have the opportunity to attend to our children in a different way because we're in their presence so often. And so I think we have to become really intentional with looking at them and thinking through, oh, right now, I'm trying to do a read aloud and they're crawling, on the back of the sofa, and maybe this is not the best time. I think we have to become good students of our children, and they're a great indicator. I think also, when you are still in the evening after all the children have gone to bed, hopefully gone to bed, and you're able to sit, it's really good to reflect on the day and what it held, and to just assess, rightly, not to assess with grandiose expectations of perfect behavior. I'm saying this because this is what I did and not what I hope that everyone else is doing. Not to assess yourself with these unrealistic expectations, but to say, you know what, today, this is something that I saw that was great. And to have even to enter into those conversations with your spouse
Mhm.
who may not be home during the day. If you are the primary educator for your family and your spouse is away, connecting with them and saying, you know what, for the last 5 days, he has thrown manipulatives all over the floor, but today he stacked them in an A B pattern. Hey, that is a win.
Yeah.
And some days you're going to look at that at the end of the day and you're going to think, well, we can make a change here. Sometimes it's good to have the perspective of someone who is not there as often to be able to say, well, have you considered this? And to be able to ask you good questions. But I think if you're going to gauge your success, your first indicator is always your children. Do your children joyfully participate in what you're asking them to do? Are you having those teachable moments where you feel like, you know what, you made a bad decision and we were able to talk about it together and we came to the conclusion that that thing was wrong and we need to choose more rightly? Are those conversations happening? Maybe not the expectation for perfect behavior, but for consistent resolution. When those things are happening, there you will feel a peace in your spirit, um, that helps you to be able to get through those days when at the end of the day you just think everything went wrong. It was all downhill from the moment they opened their eyes today. And there are days like that. There are going to be good days and there are going to be days that you look back on and you go, wow, Lord, thank you for being gracious today. But the average of those days, you should feel just a peaceful spirit that you are moving in the right direction. And so, I think coming into a good relationship with our children, attending to our children, seeing them on the regular, knowing that they're, participating joyfully, they're asking good questions, that they are genuinely engaged. That's a really good indicator of whether or not you are in the sweet spot, or you, as I did when I first, when we first began homeschooling, tried to rigidly, order every detail of the day. Rhythms and routines beat rigid schedules every time.
Mm.
That helps us to be able to love our children well and to recognize that they're little people who feel big things from time to time. And we need to be there for those moments to help resolve that in a positive way.
That's so great. And I love what you said about them being little people who feel big things. I think we can all relate to that. And honestly, we're big people who feel big things sometimes too. And so just slowing down enough to notice. For me, a lot of the time, it's actually time. I have to give myself margin. I can't smack the day full of everything. And if that means that we only do one or two things today, because I have to give myself the margin to accomplish what is actually important in our day, then that's what it's going to mean. And as a checklist and slightly overachiever, not that I'm really achieving, but in my mind, I'm going to achieve. That can be hard for me. Kelli, what do you do to keep the main thing the main thing? That's my second hack. It's keep the main thing the main thing. How do you focus? If a family wants to focus on one thing spiritually or educationally, how do they do that?
Mm. How to keep the main thing, is a challenge no matter what age your children are, because there will always be distractions. When they're young, sometimes they are the distractions. And as they get older, all the activities that they want to be involved with are the distractions. All three of our children at different points have been involved in different activities. And so, it can be, you can sometimes feel like as the parent, you're juggling or you're the ringmaster of this circus of insanity. And the truth is, I think what you have already said to keep the main thing, you have to give yourself time to do that. Sometimes all these activities can make your day feel like it's so packed full of busyness that you don't have time to breathe and you don't have time to be. And that is a dangerous place. When you get to the point where you are doing things without thinking, then you've crossed the line. You should have time in your day to think and to ponder and then to do the next thing. So, when our children were young, we had touch points throughout the day where I would just say, everybody on the couch. And then I would clap my hands and I would chase them down the hallway and they would laugh and giggle and they would all pile on the couch. And hopefully there would be no collisions of elbows and heads or anything else. But then I would look at them and I would say, how are you doing? And they would give me thumbs up or, they would make a frowny face. And I would just check in with them to see like, okay, how are we doing? Really legitimately. Now that has evolved into teenagers who I come up to and I give a hug and I say, how are you doing? And they know that I mean it because that's family culture. I think that the main thing for us as homeschoolers has to be that we are pointing our children to Christ. Whether or not we're doing algebra or whether or not we are, sounding out consonant, vowel, consonant words in a basal reader, no matter, or any activity in between, it needs to point to, who is God and how are we in relationship with him and how do we follow after him with our whole heart. And I just think, for our family, those touch points, those little check-ins have been crucial to us, being able to keep a finger on the pulse of our children's hearts. And I would say that would be my advice to any young mama or dad that's listening to this podcast. Make time for the check-ins. Make time to look at your child in his eyes or her eyes and say, how you doing? And mean it. And, smile at them, connect with them. Don't keep your face in your phone all the time. It's such a temptation when you feel like you have a down moment to go, okay, I'm going to go on Instagram and I'm going to doom scroll, or I'm going to go to Pinterest and I'm going to look for, no, like that is prime time for you to connect with those little ones. And so I think that would be my advice. Delise, what about you? Like, how do you right now keep the main thing with your little ones? Because you're at a different end of the spectrum. So what is life like for you on the regular right now?
We want to interrupt this show to tell you about Summit Ministries. For the past 60 years, Summit has equipped and supported raising generations to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. So now more than ever, our children really do need to be winsome and brave in the face of the culture's lives. And your children will be personally mentored at Summit Ministries by the top Christian thinkers and speakers on the big questions, things like abortion, gender ideology, the problem of pain and evil, dating, economics, and God's will for their lives. Have your whole family or your whole challenge class join Summit online for 1 week this summer, or send your older teen to an in-person camp for 2 weeks and a life-changing experience. To find out more, visit summit.org/CC before March 31st for an early bird pricing and get an additional $250 off your in-person conference when you register with the code CC26. We hope you enjoy Summit Ministries. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, so when I was thinking about what is the main thing, like, okay, how do we keep it? First, what is it? Is my question always, what is it? Define it.
Exactly.
And I wrote down love God and obviously love others. I think that's a natural one. But as I was observing myself and thinking, okay, well, that's such a grandiose idea. How do you bring that down? I've noticed that I really like to create bucket lists, and that helps me because what I'm doing is I take time to dream when I have a quiet moment and pray and say, okay, Lord, what are some things in just this season that you want me to accomplish or you want me to be able to do with my family? And I put them in categories. So like, this is winter. And then I write that down so that, and it's on my fridge, it's on the side of my fridge, so that as I'm going throughout my day, if I feel a little listless or like, man, are we really doing the right thing in this season? Because I'm a much more
Yes.
visionary thinker than I am like granular. I can look at the bucket list and I'll know, okay, I am prioritizing the right things. Or if I'm not, there's usually something on that list that I can easily grab onto. Like
Right.
quiet winter walks is on my list
Mm.
right now. And I
Mhm.
know that that helps me keep the main thing, because if I
Yes.
am making time for quiet winter walks, then we're wondering at God's creation. We're spending time with each other. We're having good
Mhm.
conversations. We're playing. How can you not play with little boys outside? So just giving myself a written and visual
Mhm.
North Star, and then also
Right.
that time to really solidify that in my heart and with the
Yeah.
Lord has really helped. Because then I don't feel like I'm in the middle of my day and I don't know what's next. Obviously, I have a school routine. We've talked about that. You can listen to those
Yes.
episodes. And obviously, we have curriculum and we do that. But just when I'm trying to make sure that we're dreaming the right direction and being really
Mhm.
consistent, um,
Mhm.
those bucket lists and like making it my own have really helped. And so that's been a lot of fun.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about some practical things, Kelli, because
Oh.
I think sometimes we can get so
Mm.
so up in the air with our ideas that we don't give parents something to hold on to and walk away with. So
Right.
you've introduced me to the idea of learning bins, and
Yeah.
hack number 4 is to use learning bins for little learners. Can you
Yes.
talk to us a little bit about what those are and how we can use them?
Oh, absolutely. So, the age spread of my children is that we had our eldest, and then his younger brother came along 27 months later, and then baby sister came along 36 months later. So, we're not super tight with ages. We have just a little bit of space. So, for a good maybe 8 years, I had a baby or a toddler in our
Mhm.
homeschooling journey, and so I had to find ways to keep little hands busy when I was trying to do things together with our whole family. And so this idea of learning bins kind of originally came about because I wanted to have big brother and little brother together at the table, working on something with me, but little brother needed to keep his hands occupied because if they weren't occupied, they would be on big brother. And
Mhm.
so I came up with this idea, and I see it popularized so much now. So I think it was a good thing, or else it wouldn't have endured. I bought some little shoe boxes. Actually, I started out by just keeping our shoe boxes from every time we would buy shoes.
Right.
But just plastic shoe boxes, and I would put little activities in there that he didn't have access to all the time, but
Mhm.
they were actually things that would give him fine motor skills practice, where he was moving his little fingers and strengthening his fingers. So I had like 3 or 4 of these little boxes to start with, and I made a goal. I was like, for every year old he is, I'll have a box. And then when he starts to write on his own, then we're done with busy boxes. Well, that idea, became things like I would put Play-Doh and some cookie cutters in, a learning bin. And so he would, have free play time with the Play-Doh, and he would roll it out and he would move his little fingers and he would poke, the first letter of his name into the Play-Doh. And while that was happening, I would be sitting with his older brother and we would be reading aloud, and he was still at the table and he was participating, but it was something that would keep him busy during
Mhm.
that time. And so, that eventually evolved into, okay, I'm doing, one-on-one work with your brother. We may be doing math, but I need little brother there to recite the math memory work from foundations. And so they would recite together, and then I would keep little hands busy with different activities in these boxes. Some fun things that I did over time were fun. He didn't realize that it was actually like structured learning. I took a Ziploc bag and I put lots of hair gel in it and
Yes, I love this one.
floated some little, plastic animals in it. And of course, like took really sturdy duct tape and taped the zipper shut so that he wasn't
Wow.
wearing hair gel or anything like that. But he would go through and he would take his finger and he would move the animals from one side of the bag to the other.
Mhm.
And he was strengthening his fingers and his dexterity. My middle son actually has the neatest handwriting of all 3 of my children. And I credit a lot of it to the fact that we were doing these kinds of just little busy activities, like I said, that he didn't have access to all the time. So when we came to the table, he was like, "Oh, I get to play. I get to, do these things." And he felt like he was learning right alongside his big brother. And then when baby sister came along, well, then the learning boxes came back out. But we had some difficulty because my middle son still wanted to do the learning boxes because he had loved them so much. But it really was a tool to help our homeschool to be more of a one-room schoolhouse,
Mhm.
because, we're working on different goals for our children at different stages of development. And when our eldest perhaps is working on being an active listener, we might need to occupy the hands of some of the younger siblings in order for them to take their first steps toward being active listeners too.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for mom, like I love hearing the things that you did, and your children are so much older than mine because I'm doing the same things and we've never talked about this. So it's kind of fun. I'm like, okay, this must be a good thing. And when I just had Leo, my quiet time, being a quiet time is really important to me. I also have a very early riser. I've mentioned that on the show before. And so I did baskets for him when he was very small. One of the baskets was a texture basket. And that was something when he was just learning to crawl. He walked at 9 months. So you can imagine how quickly we were moving. So
Yes.
when he was very busy, very small, and I still needed him to sit still, I would bring out this texture box. And instead of it having things that little children usually can see, I learned very quickly to give him things that are usually quote off limits, and that was much more interesting to my child than a toy. So,
Yes.
and it was also cheaper and more accessible for me. So I would take
Yes.
like a bottle brush, I would take sandpaper, I would take all kinds of things and give that to him. And
Mm-hmm.
then he could just explore it in a very safe environment, but it was effective and um, it helped him to be occupied, but it also helped me to be occupied, and then I could read aloud my Bible study to him, etc.
Yes.
So, friends, I think I'll let that be our last hack for today, but I want to encourage you to really think about your children and and
Mhm.
and to think about the things that Kelli said. It's not as much about getting it all perfect, but it is
Mhm.
about keeping the North Star in place and really allowing the Lord to speak to you and to remind you like what's important for your family, and are you prioritizing that? Because if you are, you're probably headed in the right direction. Is what I'm hearing Kelli say. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree. And I think, that North Star is the biggest hack of all. Stay committed to it and keep moving in that direction. Even though some days you're going to feel like your coordinates are a little wonky, stay focused on where you're headed. And your goals will be realized with your family. Don't set unrealistic expectations for yourself or for the people that you love. Just offer grace to them and realize this is not a solo effort, friends. We are in this together, with our families, but also with our communities. So rely on those people around you to continue to encourage you and to help rally support for you and strength for you on times when you need it the most.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this show. If you have, please make sure to give it a good review over on whatever platform you use. And don't forget that you can find us on YouTube at Classical Conversations. We'll talk to you soon, and thank you so much for listening.